Mazda Millenia. These are kind of neat. They are really smooth, actually. This is a front-wheel drive car. It was like the thing on top of the 626. It was the thing that replaced the 929. And when they went from the 929 to the Millenia, they changed the name and they went from a rear-wheel drive car to a front-wheel drive car. And this was the quote flagship unquote sedan for Mazda. I like the paint job and I like the condition. I like the condition of the inside, I like the condition of the outside. It's not quite Lexus quality inside, but it's pretty dang close actually. You know, it's pretty close to like an ES Lexus at least. And again, I've ridden one of these. They're incredibly smooth. And the engines in these were kind of special. It was a V6 and it was, I think, not really shared with the 626 or anything else. Religiously maintained, full synthetic oil changes. We've had this for a while. No leaks, no rust. How much is this? $4,900 bucks. That's a little bit high, but it's not even 100,000 miles. Not even 100,000 miles. Mazda Millenia S. Mazda Millenia S. It was a Miller cycle engine, and I don't even know what that means. I just remember reading that, and it's like, am I supposed to know what that means? Because I'm going to be honest with you. Yeah. It would employ a Miller cycle engine. It was the only production car in the world to employ a Miller cycle engine. Yaw sensitive four-wheel steering was available in Japan only. North American market. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah. And also another thing about these was they were Mazda was trying to start up a luxury brand. Mazda was like gonna copy Lexus essentially. They were gonna start up a luxury brand and they were gonna have like a flagship, like a Q45 LS400 competitor, and then they were or knockoff really. You know, you say competitor, a lot of times that really just means knockoff, like an LS400 knockoff. And then they're gonna copy Lexus. They're gonna have an LS400 knockoff. They're gonna have an ES knockoff. And this was originally designed as the ES knockoff for this luxury brand that basically never came to exist. The Millenia was available in the US with either the Millenia S or without the Miller cycle engine. So 3 models were optioned: the base model, the mid-level Millennium with standard leather upholstery, power moonroof, and keyless entry, and the top-of-line S model, which this is, Mazda Millenia S, which featured traction control, heated front seats, heavy-duty wipers, and the 2.3-liter, pretty wild actually, 2.3-liter V6 Miller cycle engine. Miller cycle engine has a shorter compression stroke and a belt-driven air compressor, essentially a supercharger. I didn't know that. I knew about the Miller cycle thing, but I kind of assumed that these were all Miller cycle engines, but apparently that's not how it worked. The standard Millenia was actually just a regular ass engine, a 2.5 V6, and then the S was a Miller. You had to get the S for the Miller cycle. That's really wild. That is actually, I'm not gonna say that's where is this? He's up in Swanee, John's. Oh yeah. I mean, this is a neat find. Honestly, this is actually a really neat find. And you know what? I would have half a mind, and I never actually do this, but like I would have half a mind to actually buy this and put it on Cars and Bids for several reasons. Like, number one, Mazda Millenia. Okay, so that's pretty rare, but that doesn't get you that far, right? Number one, Mazda Millenia. But number two, less than 100,000 miles. Okay, that's also kind of neat. Number three, and also the condition goes with that. But number three, it is a Mazda Millenia S, which is one of the ones with the rare Miller cycle turbocharged or supercharged engine. Like that's a rare beast. And $4,900. Listen, this is an actual owner, and you can tell. Look at those nice alloys, that nice two-tone paint. This thing is really nice. But like, look at this neighborhood and look at this deal. And I'm going to tell you right now that I see a lot of deals on Craigslist. These individuals are not trying to make any money off of anybody who are selling this car. These people, like, you go in there, you're nice, you tell them how much you love the car. You got to tell them, oh, this is so amazing. The Mazda Millenia S is so rare. Tell them something about the car they don't already know. Teach them something about the Miller cycle. If you tell this person selling this car something cool about the Miller cycle, they will come down to they will come down at least $1,000 on you. And then here you're in it for $4,000. How many Mazda Millenia S models with under 100,000 miles in like perfect cherry original shape on the face of the planet do you think exist at this point in time? Probably not a whole, it's not a large number. It's not a large number. And I don't think these people realize that or care or need to squeeze any extra juice out of this orange. So like, yeah, I mean, I would have half a mind to buy this thing, put it up on Cars and Bids. And because this is actually a special car. This is actually really neat, really special, and it needs to go to somebody who doesn't just want a $4,000 car, who actually like is gonna care. But the Miller cycle, I'm really curious about what makes the Miller cycle. I mean, it's a completely different thermodynamic cycle than like a normal, like engine, right? The particular nature of the Miller cycle permits the supercharged version not only be moderately more power, but also claim almost diesel-like fuel economy with lower emissions than the simpler, cheaper suction intake one. In contrast to the usual situation of supercharging causing significantly increased fuel consumption. Like, that's really freaking neat. This was like the only, like, from what I understand, this was like the Mazda Millenia, now not just any Mazda Millenia, but the Mazda Millenia S was like the only car out there to even feature like this thermodynamic cycle of an engine in production to like the regular Americans could just go out and buy. In a Miller cycle engine, the intake valve is left open longer than would be an Otto cycle. In effect, the compression stroke is 2 discrete cycles. The initial portion where the intake valve is open and the final portion where the intake valve is closed, this 2-stage compression stroke, okay, so that's what makes it a Miller cycle, not an Otto cycle, is that you basically have like an A and a B compression stroke. So you break your compression stroke into 2 separate sections, so-called fifth stroke, that the Miller cycle introduces as the piston initially moves upward and was traditionally the compression stroke. The charge is partially expelled back out through the still open intake valve. Typically, this loss of air would result in loss of power. Yeah, because you have like, you're lowering your compression ratio, you have less air to combust, obviously, right? However, in the Miller cycle, this is compensated for by the use of a supercharger. The supercharger will typically need to be of positive displacement roots or screw type due to its ability to boost at relatively low engine speeds. So it's like you're pushing your intake charge out using the piston while pushing it back in through the supercharger at the same time. And somehow, for some crazy thermodynamic reason, this is more efficient than just like taking the charge, closing the intake valve, and compressing. That's pretty wild. Efficiency is increased by having the same effective compression ratio and a larger expansion ratio. This allows more work to be extracted from the expanding gases. As that's the root of why this thermodynamic cycle is more efficient, is that you are, unlike every other piston engine, you have a smaller compression stroke than your expansion stroke. That's while having the same compression ratio, because remember, while you were pushing that air out, the supercharger was pushing it back in, so you didn't actually lose it. That's fucking wild. Like, that's really something. That is really something. Like I said, I rode in one of these one time, and I was impressed. I was impressed. I never drove it, but I rode in it, and that was enough for me to be like, I remember that. I specifically remember that because like I was expecting it to be like, oh, I've ridden in Lexus ESs, I've ridden in Maximas, they're not really anything special. But I've rode in one of these once, and it made an impression on me. That's right click. That's right click. That's right click. We're right clicking.